Well, every once in a while, in a kind of extraordinary way, a video will just explode. It'll make its way all over the country. It'll sweep like wildfire through the virtual world. And the most recent example of this phenomenon is a video, kind of slickly produced video, of a young man in a leather jacket, and he's kind of half rapping, half speaking a very simple poem about Jesus and religion. More precisely, why Jesus came to abolish religion, how Jesus stands over and against religion. Well, this, short, maybe 5-minute, simple video with a very simple argument has inexplicably, in my judgment, become this overnight sensation. As I record these words, I think it's around 13 million views on YouTube. Well, I first heard about it through a student of mine at the seminary who said, hey, there's this video going around, maybe you should comment on it. So I watched it, and I remember thinking, this video has gotten so much attention? Go figure. But then I got flooded with requests on my site, on the Facebook page. Father, you got to say something about this video. So here goes. Here's my reaction to it. But what it represents is a kind of simplistic expression of evangelicalism. It's a view that has its roots in the thought of Martin Luther. You go back to the 16th century Reformation. And what do you find in Luther? Well, as a central idea that we are justified or we're saved, not by our works, but rather through faith, by grace accepted in faith. So there's the center of Luther's Reformation. We're not saved through the church, we're not saved through institutions, the liturgies and sacraments, or moral effort. We're saved by accepting in faith the grace of Christ. Now, this basic idea led Luther, in some of his texts anyway, and certainly a lot of his followers, to demonize much of ecclesial life. So things like sacraments and liturgies and masses and even the call for good works were kind of demonized as a distraction from the grace that comes from Christ alone. So all of this constitutes the religion that many evangelicals to this day are against, including this young man. So here's the militancy in favor of Jesus and his grace and against religion. Now, you know what's interesting are the political and cultural implications of this view, because it begins as a theological perspective, but it has huge ramifications in the world beyond the world of religion. It is absolutely no accident that freedom becomes the great watchword of modern politics. Think of our own country, as the land of the free. If there's one value we cherish, it's freedom. We'll trace it back behind Jefferson and Rousseau and those people. Go right back to Martin Luther. His maybe most revolutionary text is called The Freedom of a Christian. So as the Christian stands free of all this religious institutionalism, so now it morphed into the political view that we should stand free of oppressive political and cultural institutions. So our own country, for example, is born in this great act of anti-institutional revolutionary violence. Helping to explain, by the way, why this video has had such great play in America. Because this idea of freedom from the institution appeals very deeply and profoundly to the American and modern soul. Okay. So, what does a Catholic make of all this? Well, I would say actually not very much. Go right back to Luther's central idea. I mean, to be blunt about it, Luther conveniently overlooked a plethora of biblical texts that militate against his position on justification by grace through faith. In fact, as Cardinal Avery Dulles pointed out, the only time justification by grace through faith alone is mentioned in the Bible, it's explicitly condemned. Look in the letter of James for that. But, for example, Matthew 25, the great parable of the sheep and the goats, what do you find? Salvation depending not really on faith so much, but on the quality of our love, especially our love toward the poorest and most marginalized. And think, too, of Paul himself, whom Luther claimed as his principal inspiration. The same Paul who spoke about justification by grace and apart from the law also said, if I have faith enough to move the mountains, but have not love, I'm nothing. An extraordinary claim, isn't it, in 1 Corinthians? The same Paul who had a very intense personal experience of conversion through Christ also spoke very eloquently of our participation in the mystical body of Jesus, by which he meant the densely textured life of the church. It's not a sort of privatized individualism that Paul's advocating, but it's a very rich ecclesial sensibility. And let's go to Jesus himself now, because a young man claims in this video that Jesus is against, religion. Well, okay, the same Jesus who railed against the Pharisees, against certain violations and misuses of religion in his own time, that same Jesus who railed against the Pharisees also said, I've come not to abolish the law, but I've come to fulfill it. The same Jesus who, yes, overturned the tables in the temple and said, I'm going to tear down this place, also said, in 3 days I will rebuild it. See, here's my point. Was Jesus against the corruptions of religion in his own time? Sure. In fact, often bitterly so. Did he know about the ways that institutional religion goes bad? Of course. And that's how he explained all these polemics against the Pharisees and so on. But, Jesus was not simply against religion. In fact, he was a loyal, law-abiding Jew. Jesus, in fact, said, I don't want to abolish it, I want to fulfill it. In other words, he took the very best of Israelite religion, took the best of Jewish institutionalism, if you want. Think of law, covenant, temple, sacrifice, priesthood, all of that. He didn't abolish it. He fulfilled it. He brought it up into a new and higher synthesis. So, the young man in the video, if he's against the corruptions of institutional religion up and down the ages to the present day, he's got an ally in me. I'm with him. But here's the thing. Finding corruptions in the religious institution of Christianity over 2,000 years is like shooting fish in a barrel. I mean, that's not very hard to find. And being against it is kind of like being against rotten eggs. I mean, who isn't against institutional corruption? But if he's advocating a kind of individualist spirituality that ignores the thousands of ties that bind us sacramentally, liturgically, and institutionally to each other, if he's trying to divorce Jesus from his mystical body, the church, then he does not have an ally in me. He has a pretty fierce opponent. In fact, the mainstream of the Catholic tradition for 2,000 years stands strongly against him. Here's something that strikes me. There are a lot of New Age people today, famously, who want spirituality without religion. And there are evangelical Christians who want Jesus without religion. See, the problem is both those views end up with an abstraction. But the one thing the real Jesus is not is an abstraction. The Word became flesh. And now that incarnation is prolonged over space and time, precisely in and through the church. Sacrament, liturgy, the mystical body, the lives of the saints, the love we have for each other. That's precisely where the real Jesus is apparent to us. So I would say against this young man, Jesus did not come to abolish religion. Jesus came to fulfill religion.